what's going on everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new Anbernic RG353PS. Now you might be thinking to yourself, you've seen a very similar handheld in the past from the same company, and you'd be right with the RG353, but there are some major differences here, and they were able to cut a lot of cost right off the top with the PS version of the RG353. We've got the same basic design, and this is something I've actually grown to really like. I love that SNES controller design here. It's laid out really nicely, super comfortable. But straight off the bat, I'd say the main difference between the price is the fact that this is only a single boot system. With the previous RG353, we were able to boot Android and Linux, but with the PS model, we've only got Linux here, and that's how they were able to cut cost. With this, they don't need a touch screen, so we don't have a touch screen with this unit. We don't need internal storage. Everything is going to run from the micro SD card. Overall, I think they've done a pretty good job with this. We've still got that beautiful 3.5-inch IPS display. Obviously, this is the non-touch version, given that we don't need to run Android on this unit. And they're offering a few different color variants. The one we're going to be taking a look at is the gray version, but they also have a clear version and a clear purple. So they're calling this white and purple, but as you can see, they are translucent. So white translucent and purple translucent. When it comes to the built-in controls, over on this side, we've got our analog stick, a function button, and our select button. And of course, since this is an Anbernic device, we've got that awesome D-pad, one of my favorites for these retro handhelds. They've done a bang-up job with this D-pad and a lot of their newer handhelds. Moving over to the right hand side, we've got our start button, power button, A, B, X, Y, and our other analog stick. And this does have dual stereo speakers built in, plus dual micro SD card slots, and a 3.5mm audio jack here on the bottom. Moving around to the top, dual USB-C, one is going to be for charging, one is for OTG. We've also got mini HDMI out, so you can connect this to a larger display. Now these are not linear triggers, but most of the stuff that we can emulate with this doesn't require it. There are a few games that would take advantage of it, but not enough to really justify using analog triggers on a device like this. When it comes to the specs of the new RG353PS, for the CPU, we've got the RK3566. It's a quad-core A55 running at 1.8 GHz. We've got the Mali G52 2EE GPU, 1 GB of LPDDR4 RAM, dual micro SD card slots, one for our operating system, one for extra games, or you could run it all from one if you wanted to, but they both support up to 512 GB cards. A 3.5-inch IPS display at 640 by 480, and this thing is beautiful. I love these little screens, especially for things like Gameboy Advance. It does have 5 GHz Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 4.2, a 3500 mAh battery, and they're claiming up to 6 hours of battery life. I've been netting around 5 hours and 20 minutes out of it, which really isn't bad. And of course, when it comes to the operating system, we're running Linux here. So we've got a standalone emulation operating system, and since this is using the RK3566, the emulation scene for this chip is fairly mature now, given that we've seen a lot of devices using the same SoC, and we've also got access to a lot of different custom firmwares that we can install on this unit. But for this video, we're going to be using the stock firmware that came pre-installed, which works out great for everything that I've tested so far. I'll tell you what, I've been using the RG353 since it was released, and with Android, doing like N64 and even Dreamcast, you will get better performance out of this chip running Android. But of course, since we've got the PS version here, we can't run Android. But when it comes down to it, I personally just like running Linux on that original one anyway. It's just a lot easier to navigate with the built-in controls. We don't have to worry about using the touch screen or anything like that. And there's still thousands and thousands of games that we can run on this at full speed. And on-the-go games, easier to emulate stuff, I've been having a great time with the PS version. And we can fully customize these themes here. There's lots of different themes we can download and install, but with the stock firmware, we've got a lot that we can choose from. I'm just going to go with the simple stock theme. Looks good on this 3.5-inch display, and it's very, very easy to navigate. But the main thing that really matters with these handhelds is how well it plays these games. So let's go ahead and jump into it. And we're going to start off here with Game Boy Color. Wanted to show you that little boot up screen. I think it looks really good on this display. The RK3566 has more than enough power to emulate the Game Boy or Game Boy Color library, so no matter what you want to play on this from those two consoles, you're going to be able to emulate it at full speed. And as you can see, it looks great. Taking it up a little bit to Game Boy Advance, and I had to show you this one here for Advance. I just get a kick out of booting up a game and having this come up. Game Boy Advance didn't have the same exact aspect ratio. As you can see, we've got that black bar on the top and bottom. And to tell you the truth, while I was testing out a few Game Boy Advance games, I didn't notice it until I went back to review the footage. I mean, as you can see, it's clearly there, but playing these games, it's not really noticeable. Nintendo DS is another one I always like to emulate on these handhelds, but as we know, the DS had dual screens, but this is already set up out of the box to kind of swap between those screens. You can use the triggers here, we can go side by side, we can bring up the first screen. If you have a game that does require dual screens, it's easy enough to swap right over when you're in full screen mode. But the overall performance here for DS is really good. Now I will admit, with a few games that I tested, I did get a few audio hiccups here or there. Never really stayed, and it wasn't something that kind of stopped me from playing those games. Genesis and Mega Drive had a load of games that are really great to play on something like this, and on that IPS display, as you can see with these Sonic games, the colors really pop. Playing something like Gunstar Heroes feels really good with the D-pad. Hadn't had an issue with performance here. Neo Geo is another one you're going to have a blast with on this device. If you wanted to do some other games that work with FBA like CPS 1, 2, and 3, we've got enough power to play them. PlayStation 1 is great on this chip. We've got Mortal Kombat 4, also went through, tested Tekken 3, and you know, like I said, we've got a lot of devices on the market right now with the RK3566, so performance across the board is kind of going to be the same as long as you're on the same firmware with the newer emulators, and performance is great across the board. Even something like Bloody Roar 2 is going to run at full speed on this chipset, so you're going to have a great time with PlayStation 1 on this device also. Moving over to some CPS2, and really I knew we'd have great performance with the emulator, but I wanted to test this D-pad, and just taking a look at these, I know exactly what we have here. This is one of the best D-pads on the market for retro devices, and I've always really loved the way they've set these up. Personally, I'm more into fighting games with these, and it's got great rolls so we can pull off our favorite special moves and our favorite fighting game, but if you're into platformers more than not, then these D-pads offer great directional input. They're not too loose, they're not too tight, and I think they've done an amazing job with how they have these set up. With everything we've tested so far, we've been getting full speed emulation. Now when it comes to N64, there's a lot of the library that's going to be fully playable, but this isn't going to handle something like Conker's Bad Fur Day or 007 very well. And it really comes down to the emulator itself. Now the community has done a great job trying to optimize these emulators and cores to make them run a little better on the RK3566, but I wouldn't pick this up to play Conker's Bad Fur Day or GoldenEye 007. Now you could definitely lower the resolution from the emulator itself and get a little better performance, but yeah, I mean, when it comes to those harder to emulate N64 games, it's not the best. And the same kind of performance goes for the next two systems we're going to be taking a look at, Dreamcast and PSP. So first up, we've got Dreamcast, and I'm running Soul Calibur, not a super hard game to emulate. In the top left-hand corner of the screen, I know it's a bit hard to see, I do have the FPS counter on, and we're right there at around 57, 58, not a steady 60, but I gotta say with frame skip on, using this Dreamcast emulator, it does work pretty good with these easier to emulate games. But that doesn't mean that every game is going to be that smooth, because when we move over to Sonic Adventure 2, we're only on an average of around 38 FPS here, and we've got frame skip on. It's not as bad as some other systems using frame skip, but I personally do notice it. Lots of skipping going on here. I mean, that's what it does, and it's just too noticeable for me to kind of enjoy playing this one here. So just keep in mind, there are Dreamcast games that you can play on this, but not all of them are going to run well. And the final one we're going to take a look at is PSP. We're using the standalone version of PPSSPP. Tekken Dark Resurrection, which is also known as Tekken 5, runs great. 1x resolution, I don't have any frame skip on, don't need any hacks with this one, and we can play this game very, very smoothly. But just taking it up to the next game in the franchise, Tekken 6, you'll see it kind of fall right on its face. So here's Tekken 6, same exact settings, I don't have any frame skip on, and we're not at 60, and usually this is fine with a lot of the emulators, you know, dipping down, but with PSP it really does rely on that frame rate to stay constant to keep that audio nice and neat. And with this, we could always turn frame skip on, so we'll go ahead and move over to the settings real quick. Pretty easy to do. Settings, frame skip, we're just going to take it to 1. Now this game should run at 60 FPS, but with frame skip set to 1, it's going to cut that in half, running it at 30. Now you can see it definitely looks a lot choppier. A lot of people out there don't mind this, but personally I'm not a huge fan of frame skip like I mentioned with Dreamcast. Overall, not a bad handheld here, given the price. Dual speakers sound great. I love this 3.5-inch IPS. Dual analog sticks. For a lot of these games, you're really going to rely on that D-pad, especially with the ones we can emulate. But all the buttons feel awesome. Great D-pad for fighting games and platformers. But in the end, it's really up to you. You could spend some more money and get the one that dual boots Android and Linux, or wait for the next iteration with a more powerful chip. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you're interested in learning more about the RG353PS, or maybe even picking one up, I'll leave some links in the description. And if you've got any questions, definitely let me know in the comments below. But like always, thanks for watching.